All right, so let's talk about some of the biggest players in psychology, and these names are actually the names you have to know in the MCAT for the psychology, the behavioral sciences section. So all of these guys are very important towards the establishment of psychology. Now, first guy we have over here, his name is Franz Gall. Now, you don't have to know the specific dates, at least for the MCAT, of how long they live, but Francis Gall, his whole thing was this concept known as phrenology. So, all right. Phrenology. So phrenology was this idea that behavioral intellect and personality are linked to brain anatomy. So just feeling the skull of someone can determine what kind of person they are. So, and a pretty much extreme example of this, which is why it's been rejected, is this example over here, where if a woman has a larger parietal lobe over here, this kind of head shape, then she'd be a better mother. While over here, if she doesn't have that kind of head shape, she won't be a great mother. So it's this connection between the anatomy of someone, especially the skull, to what kind of person they are and their personality or how they act in the world, which this has been dismissed, this has been disproven, but it did lead to this idea that certain brain structures can lead to different understandings of behavior and different functions. Now, that is when we enter Jean-Pierre Florenz. So this is, let me change my font over here. So this is Jean-Pierre Florenz. So I'll just do Pierre. So Jean-Pierre Florenz is known for is this idea of extirpation. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that one correctly, or ablation. And this is the idea that various parts of the brain were removed, and he mostly did this with pigeons, and he found that there are different behavioral consequences. So he found that removing one part of the brain can weaken the entire brain. So this was the idea that in which when we take specific parts of the brain out, this can result in different behavioral processes that are lost. So for example, if we lost our frontal lobe, then we wouldn't be able to control our emotions. So taking one part of the brain out can weaken the rest of the brain. All right, so now let's talk about William James. So William James is regarded as one of the founders of psychology, and he was in the school of functionalism. So this is functionalism. Functionalism is tied to William James. And functionalism, pretty much as the name kind of entails, is talking about how these mental processes or behaviors have a specific function. For example, if we feel anxious, that feeling of anxiety, the function of it might be to alert us of a presence of danger. So if you're anxious for an exam, then there might be a function to that in which you have some sort of internal fear of that exam, that you might fail, of that importance of it, or something like if we have that fight or flight response. The function we have the fight or flight response is to get us out of danger. So functionalism is just talking about how these mental processes have a specific function that help individuals adapt to their environment. All right, so now let's talk about John Dewey. So this guy over here is John Dewey. And what he's known for is criticizing this idea of the reflex arc. So I'll just put criticize reflex arc. So an example of this is if you stepped on a Lego brick. So stepping on that Lego brick creates a signal that the sensory neurons will transmit all the way to the interneurons, and the interneurons will transmit a signal to the motor neuron telling the foot to get off of that Lego brick because it's painful, and the brain will transmit that pain, but before that happens, the interneurons have already sent a signal to the motor neurons. So that is a reflex arc, and one of the parts of the reflex arc is that it broke down the process of reacting to a stimulus, like stepping on a Lego brick, into discrete parts. So John Dewey was the one that criticizes this idea, and he emphasized that psychology is the study of the whole organism. So psychology shouldn't be displayed or broken down into discrete parts. Psychology should be seen as a whole in the organism. All right, so our next guy is Paul Broca, and his last name might actually sound familiar as it's the Broca's area. And how he found the Broca's area is that he was studying people who couldn't speak, and he found brain lesions on the left side of the brain, which is known as the Broca's area. So what he sort of found is that there's certain conditions that can be caused by brain lesions. So over here, we'll just put Broca's area. The real thing you just have to know is that Paul Broca, he founded the Broca's area, and in honor of him, that is why it's named the Broca's area. And by the way, the Broca's area is responsible for speech production. Now let's talk about Hermann von Helmholtz. So Hermann von Helmholtz, he was the one that measured the speed of nerve impulses. So he was the first to measure speed of nerve impulses. So he was the first that measured the speed of nerve impulses, and he was the actually prominent figure that took psychology from philosophy to a natural science, in which there's actually evidence to show that, for example, the speed of nerve impulses can be improved with myelin sheath on the neurons, things like that. So Hermann von Helmholtz is a prominent figure that was the first to test or measure the speed of nerve impulses, and he actually took psychology from this philosophy-based science to a natural science that we can actually quantify. All right, and last but not least, we have Sir Charles Sherrington. So Sir Charles Sherrington is actually the one that inferred the existence of synapses. So he was very right in a lot of the structure of the synapses, where it is at the end of the neuron. It connects both neurons to display a signal. But the only thing he was not right about was that the synapses in the process of transmitting a signal from each synapse of the neuron is a chemical process, which he assumed that was a electrical process. So that's the only thing he got wrong, but just know that Sir Charles Sherrington was the one that inferred the existence of synapses.